Hello, I'm John Speights. Welcome to the Veterans Roundtable. Our guest for this segment is Colonel James Hiteshew, an educator at Eastern Wayne High School near Goldsboro, North Carolina. And Jim was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam conflict. He was held by the North Vietnamese. Jim, we're very glad to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. Glad to have the opportunity to be with you.
We appreciate your making the trip to be with us here today, even though it was a long drive. Among the groups that Jim belongs to is that he's a life member of the AMVETS Veteran Service Organization. Jim, about how long were you a POW in Vietnam?
I was held for 6 years.
Oh, that's a long time. Did you count the days?
That was 2,185 days.
Oh, yes. A little bit before we get into your experiences as a POW, Jim, could you give our viewers a little bit of your background in the service?
Okay, I was originally from West Virginia, and I entered the Coast Guard Academy in 1949. Spent 3 years at the Coast Guard Academy. I left the Coast Guard and came directly into the Air Force, received my commission through aviation cadets, and was commissioned and received my wings in 1953. So I was on active duty for 27 years in the Air Force.
Oh, that's a long time. Before you were captured by the enemy, Jim, had you received some training as a pilot in escape and evasion?
I had gone through the survival training school at that time it was STED. It's held at Fairchild now, but STED Air Force Base at Reno, Nevada, and went through the program. I'd also gone through sea survival and also jungle survival in the Philippines, and probably the jungle survival was the most appropriate. I got more benefit out of the jungle survival than any of them.
Oh, that's good. Could you tell our viewers, Jim, a little bit about how you were shot down and your first initial periods of confinement?
I was shot down on the 11th of March, 1967, and our mission was the Tainuchin steel plant. It's about 40 miles north of Hanoi. And they tried to get in on the plant the day before, and the mission was aborted because of weather. And so I was leading the third flight in. I was a flight lead on the third strike. And they had everything waiting for us. And we were dive bombing the target, and we'd come in and go up to about 13,000 feet and dive down on the target. And I got hit just coming off the target. The aircraft took a hit. The cockpit filled with black smoke, and I was going still in afterburner, so I was going about 550 knots indicated when I had to leave the aircraft.
Then were you captured shortly after parachuting?
Yes, when I left the aircraft, the wind blast unfortunately broke both of my legs, and my arm were broken in the ejection sequence. The parachute did open, and I came down. I was fortunate I landed in a bamboo thicket, and I got no landing shock on my broken legs. But all my training at Fairchild and STED and all, I evaded for about 30 seconds.
Oh, okay, yes.
But I was captured immediately on hitting the ground.
Jim, was it a missile that downed you?
I don't know. Everybody asked me what hit me, and whatever it was made a loud noise. I knew I was hit, and so I have no idea what hit the aircraft.
Then, Jim, could you tell us a little bit about how you were treated as a prisoner? I believe you have your prison clothes here.
Yes, I brought some of the prison garb that I brought out with me. The initial, as I said, I was severely injured on getting out of the aircraft. I ended up with 2 broken legs, a broken arm, and was to find out after I got home I had a fracture of the neck too, which I guess what you don't know at the time doesn't hurt you. But I was interrogated for about a week after initial capture. Was taken into Hanoi at the Heartbreak Hotel in downtown Hanoi. and put into a cell, tossed on the floor of about a 7-foot square cell, sewage running on the floor, and there I was interrogated for approximately a week before receiving any medical attention.
Oh, really?
That was my roughest time, the first week of captivity.
Oh, they didn't do anything about your broken legs?
No, I was surprised then. They did feed me. Of course, I didn't have much appetite at that time, and our food basically consisted of rice. But the big thing I found out there was the rats. Laying on the floor, and they'd bring in the food, and the rats would challenge you for it. So that was my experience, welcoming to Vietnam.
Yes. And Jim, after the initial week of interrogation, you were moved to a more permanent prison camp?
Okay, I was in Heartbreak Hotel, which was the initial interrogation. Was taken down to the military hospital right in Hanoi, which is not anything like any of our hospitals. It's pretty crude, but I remember they put me up on an old painted table. The nurse hit me with a needle, and I went out, and I woke up. I had about 40 pounds of plaster on me. They had put me in a body cast, and then plus the left arm in a cast. And I woke up, and I was back on the floor in the sewage of the cell I left in Heartbreak. So I stayed there for probably another day, and then was moved in with another American POW who was to take care of me.
Did you stay in the same location during the 6 years?
I was moved, was moved into Little Vegas. I was in room 3 of the Golden Nugget, which is any resemblance between that and Nevada is purely imaginary, I guess. But prisoners had a sense of humor. And that camp was named Little Vegas, which was in the same complex as Heartbreak Hotel. I stayed there for approximately a month there, and this young Lieutenant Jack Davies who was taking care of me. And then Jack and I were moved over to another more permanent camp, which we called the Zoo, which was in the southern part of Hanoi. And there again, Jack and I were put into the room, the building we called the barn, and we spent approximately 3 months there in that camp.
I guess.
Okay, I was taken from there. Jack and I were separated, and I was put in with 2 more POWs, Charlie Southwick and Leo Forsness. Leo, by the way, has been involved in politics, ran an unsuccessful campaign against George McGovern, but he's also a Medal of Honor winner.
Oh, he lives in South Dakota?
South Dakota. He's now in California at the time.
Leo, what was his name again?
Forsness.
Oh.
And the Medal of Honor winner in Vietnam. I lived with Leo and Charlie for almost 2 years. That's cellmates. And Jack, unfortunately, once we separated, they put him in solitary confinement for the next 18 months.
Yes. Jim, as an officer, did you have to do manual labor?
No, that's one of the problems we had. We never got outside of the cell. They were partitioned off. The cell blocks the windows were bricked over, had 3 small vent holes, and a little trap door in the front of the cell, which they put in food through it. So you were confined there for 23 hours and 45 minutes a day. They would let you out of that cell for approximately 15 minutes each morning to empty your waste bucket and to wash your clothes and to bathe. And so you had about 15 minutes a day out of the cell. We welcomed the opportunity to work or do something, anything to get out of that cell.
Oh, yes. Were you allowed to receive mail from home?
I was one of the fortunate ones. Some individuals were, and some weren't, and we could never see any method. Now, I was able to send a letter out to my wife. I was interviewed by an American correspondent a couple of months after I had been there, and I was able to get a letter out to my wife through him, which let her know that I was a prisoner, and so I was changed from a missing status to a POW status. The Vietnamese never recognized the Geneva Convention or any of that, and so We had guys that were held there for years in the missing status that they did not ever acknowledge the fact that they were prisoners.
Oh yes. Did the enemy forward your mail back and forth?
Mail was very scarce. And like I said, I was allowed to write. And originally, when we started writing, we'd write a rough draft of a letter. We were allowed to write 6 lines, and I don't think I have a copy of the letter with me, but you were allowed to write 6 lines. You wrote a rough draft, gave it to the Vietnamese, and they would censor it and make sure they understood what you were trying to say. And if they approved it, they'd give it back to you, and then you would write it with a straight pen and ink, and it'd be forwarded. My roommate, Charlie Southwick, was not allowed to write. So some of the things we had, if you wrote in your room, you had your roommate maybe get a little ink smudge on his thumb and hold the letter. So if we couldn't get his name out, we could get his fingerprints out.
Mm-hmm.
So just anything to try to get acknowledged that the individual was a prisoner.
Oh, yes. Jim, did you get anything like Red Cross parcels?
No, we didn't get any Red Cross parcels. And like I say, the mail that I received 3 letters that were written in 1967. Now, these letters would be approximately a year old when I would receive them. I received 3 letters written in 1968. I did not get any mail written in 1969. And then by the middle of 1970, I started getting mail. I believe I received about 28 letters for the 6 years I was there. The packages, our families were allowed to send us packages. And as a matter of fact, myself and my roommate were among the first that was later on, was the first to be able to receive packages. And it was very disappointing. The Vietnamese had confiscated everything that had been in them, so we received very little of it.
Oh, that's too bad. And they did they not recognize the Geneva Convention?
Oh, never. We were never treated as prisoners of war. We were always treated as war criminals.
Oh.
And they, even to the day that we were released, they never acknowledged the fact that we were POWs.
Had that country, do you know, signed the Geneva Convention?
They had signed the Geneva Accords, but like most of the communist countries, they take exception to one block on that, where they have the right to determine whether the prisoner's a military prisoner, whether he's a POW, or whether he's a war criminal. And they exempt what they call war criminals from the POW status. And most of the communist bloc countries took exemption to one phase, and they make the determination as to what your status are.
Well, I didn't know they can do that. It doesn't seem like it'd be right for them to be able to.
The communist countries have made exception on one block on there.
Oh, you mean when they signed it?
Yes. And so they treat you the way they want to.
So it's would it follow that a POW attempting to escape from a communist country would be in greater danger of being tried in civilian courts?
Well, I don't know. Truthfully, of course, once you are captured, you do revert to if you escape, you are an escapee, which means you are subject to the civil laws of the detaining country. And up until you've been captured, you can do anything you want to, but once you have been captured, you are subject to the laws of the detaining country. So if you steal somebody's bicycle or this and that, they could send you legally to prison for theft.
Well, Jim, with the sparsity of mail that y'all received, did you get much news of the outside world?
Initially, we did. 67, 68, we had new prisoners joining us every week as the new shootouts came in. It kept us abreast of what was going on in the outside world. And then basically, we got backhand news off of they played the English Voice of Vietnam for us, their propaganda to the troops in the South. So we could pick up information from that, intelligence and all, from what was going on world affairs, from comments that they made on that. But in 1969, June of 1969, we had an escape attempt from our camp. And the Vietnamese they would always read off the casualty list for that day. They would pick up the American casualty list and read it off to the GIs in the South. The two guys that escaped
Over the radio program?
on the radio program, they'd always read off the Americans that had been killed that day, the casualty list, in their hometowns. So the two guys that escaped, in order to let us know if they made it or not, there were two names that would be read on that casualty list, would be announced on the casualty list in hometowns. And so in the event we ever heard those names in hometowns, we knew that they got home okay. That was our, well, unfortunately, their attempt failed, and the Vietnamese found out that we were using their program against them and counterintelligence, and so from then on we were not even allowed to hear the voice of Vietnam. And then the bombing halt in '68, no more prisoners coming in. So we were virtually about 4 years there. We had with very, very little information from home.
Did the enemy continue to give you propaganda there in the...
They did initially. We were their attempt at brainwashing, I guess, and it was very, very crude and very unsuccessful, I would say, on all attempts. The biggest thing they would do would try to extract propaganda out of us by force and torture. So most of the information they were after on us was strictly propaganda.
To use for propaganda purposes?
Propaganda purposes. To get you to make a statement or write something contrary to your government's position.
Oh, and there was some mistreatment and torture?
There was extensive mistreatment and torture, especially in the early years. We had a few men die as a result of torture. As one of the facts, little-known facts, is that we had a Cuban contingent that was in Hanoi, in our camp. We appropriately named one of them Fidel and the other one Rolo, two Cuban officers that were in our camp.
Oh, on which side?
Two Cuban officers on the Vietnamese side. They eventually had control of 30 American prisoners of war. And their idea was to break these prisoners into complete submission.
They spoke English?
They spoke English. One of our prisoners was killed, went insane as a result of torture from the Cubans. Later died, or I guess when we were released, they did not release Earl with us, and they sent his bones home a year later. So, but it was the direct result of the Cubans. In fact, I personally witnessed Fidel, as we called him. He had the guys next door. The 9 guys next door were his charges, and I've seen him take them out and take about a 4-foot length of rubber hose and administer a severe beating to all of them for misconduct. So he was mean.
And well, Jim, in the enemy's interrogation of the prisoners, did they use propaganda about the anti-war movement in the United States?
Yes, that was used extensively. One of the ironic things about it, I guess, Joan Baez, she quite active in the anti-war movement. And it was very ironic in our particular prison camp. Anytime they were torturing a prisoner, they had him up in what we called the head shed, torturing a prisoner, and they would want to drown out his screams. They would put one of Joan's records on the PA system and crank the volume up. So anytime you heard that volume up and Joan singing, you knew there was some poor guy really getting bent. So, it's very difficult to listen to some of those songs now because they bring back a lot of unpleasant memories.
Yes. The prisoners were physically located near Hanoi?
We had probably about 7 different prison camps, all not in the same group. We were spread out, like say the Zoo, Dog Patch, Alcatraz, Little Vegas. They were different camps all over the place. They even took some prisoners and put them down by one of the strategic targets, down the power plant down on the Red River, and thinking that if we had prisoners of war in this power plant, we wouldn't bomb it. In fact, 2 of the guys escaped from that camp and almost made it. Came very close to getting out. But they did disperse us around from different camps, yes.
Were you did you know about Jane Fonda going to North Vietnam?
Oh, yes. Jane didn't bother me as much as Ramsey Clark did.
Oh.
Ramsey's the guy that upset me. Attorney General when I went over, and then all of a sudden he comes over a few years later and says, "What are you guys doing over here?" You know, like he didn't have a thing to do with it. And he made some tapes for the Vietnamese that they played to us. Very, very derogatory as far as the American fighting man is concerned. Mm-hmm. Yes, he just undermined us. Ramsey, Jane, I considered her a little naive and a little misinformed, and also trying to get publicity for herself. Ramsey should have known better. A guy that's been in his position, and I would say he's had the opportunity to at least be to have the information. Now, whether he ever read it or not, or knows what he's doing, but Ramsey upset me. I hold more grudge against him than any of the others.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Jim, you mentioned escape. If it wouldn't reveal any secrets, could you tell us a little bit about the escape attempts? Did would the prisoners just have to try to make it through the jungle toward the south?
Yeah, the idea was it was very difficult. It was very easy to get out of the camp, escape from the camp. In fact, it's very ironic. The particular night that we had the escape attempt from our camp, that two of the individuals escaped, my two roommates were going to escape the same night. At that particular time, I was living in a room. There were four of us together. The perimeter wall around the camp, we had a big wall around the camp, but the building we were in was back up against the wall. And all we had to do was go get into the overhead, the attic, and they had some barbed wire over it, but it was real easy to get into the attic. They had to push off a couple of tiles, jump off of the roof, and you were out of the camp. So it was 5 minutes, very easy to get out of the camp. My two roommates had stolen shoes because this footwear here is all we had was the sandals. So it's very difficult to travel over much terrain with these. You needed shoes, and the Vietnamese knew that. They'd stolen some shoes from the Vietnamese, some rice, had tailored their clothes in iodine to blacken their face to blend in, and so had a pretty decent escape plan in mind. The two of them were going to go. The other two of us, I was not in physical shape to go at that time, and the other one didn't. He thought it was useless, but we would cover for them while they went. They picked the same night that the other two guys did, and neither escape plan was coordinated. It was just coincidentally.
Well, you didn't have an escape committee?
No, we really didn't. And that was to cause a lot of grief because the Vietnamese read the book too and tried to find out who the escape committee was, and we didn't have one. But anyhow, the two guys did escape. My two roommates didn't, but they had their escape gear all up in the overhead. The next morning, the Vietnamese came in and gave us a shakedown inspection. And my two roommates decided at the last minute to abort their escape for that night. The Vietnamese came in, brought a ladder in to check the overhead. And I remember I was up against the wall, holding up the wall, and I looked around at Jim. He looked at me, I turned white, he turned red, I guess, and they were giving us a complete shakedown inspection. The ladder was too long, they couldn't get it in the cell. They took it back out, and the Vietnamese take a siesta between noon and 2 o'clock. Mm-hmm. They didn't get back to us before noon, and so we sent our roommate up to clear out the overhead. Mm-hmm. We got all the stuff distributed on out in the courtyard outside by throwing it out through the vents. And promptly at 2 o'clock they came back in with a shorter ladder and inspected the overhead. And we were very, very fortunate that we were not caught with the escape gear.
Oh, that's good.
I lost about 10 years of my life at that particular time.
Yes. Jim, could we look at some of the paraphernalia you brought?
Okay, these things I've got. This is just plain old prison garb. As you see, these trousers here. One of the initial prisoners shot down was Billy Robinson from over at Robertsonville, North Carolina. He was a crew chief on a helicopter. And Billy weighed about 250 pounds. I think they used Billy as a model because all their clothing was tailored after him. He was shot down early. Billy, by the way, ended up on a stamp, of a Vietnamese stamp. But this was our prison garb. Was given our tire sandals. These here, it's been a few years with me. The cup. This cup stayed with me. I got it the first week I was there, and it stayed with me the entire time. So.
Oh, excuse me, Jim. One of the American POWs was on a North Vietnamese stamp.
Yes.
Depicting the.
It's Billy Robinson from over at Robertsonville, North Carolina. And Billy was shot down, wounded, and it posed a little girl with a gun, posed behind him, bringing him in, capturing him. And they used that picture on the Vietnamese stamp. And when Billy was ready to leave, one of the guards did bring him one of those stamps. And he did bring it out with him, so he did. Some of the other clothes, sometimes we stayed in the black, sometimes in the prison stripes, this particular one.
And Jim,
the monogram is when later on we went from living in isolation to 50 guys per room. When you washed your clothes and hung them up and everybody's clothes looked the same, you had to have some idea of distinguishing yours from the others. So this was done by pulling a thread out of the blanket and a fishbone needle to monogram that. We were given toothpaste, toothbrush. These are some pictures that I did receive from home. And any of the pictures we received, the Vietnamese would take and put them in plastic. And if they caught us with the things outside of the plastic, they would confiscate them.
Why was that?
They were afraid that there were messages inside or something, and they were trying to send information to us through these pictures.
Oh, well, that's funny, because they were helping you to preserve the pictures.
Yeah, that's so, but they did. They would laminate them for us. Later on in the stay, we were privileged to, when we got into large groups, we started getting some entertainment. We banded together. I guess we started some college-level courses. We had some guys that spoke Spanish fluently, taught Spanish, Russian, German, French. Math, we went through math, from basic math through differential equations. Had some very competent instructors. And we even organized the Hanoi chapter of Toastmasters. And Toastmasters International, by the way, recognized the work that we did. But rather than to sit there and vegetate, we tried to, make productive use of our time. And this book here, I was privileged. I got a hold of a Russian calculus book. I extracted about 1,000 calculus problems and answers out of it. And I've worked every one of those. Sometimes it's been several hours by just a piece of brick and on the concrete floor working calculus problems.
Do you speak Russian?
No. I couldn't do the word problems in the book, but I could do all the other, the math problems were the same. And it was an outstanding math book, by the way. It was a very, very well-written book. But this is basically the garb that we wore. The diet. Should we sit on?
Oh, yes, we can sit back down.
The diet that we had basically consisted of rice and greens, really. Very little meat. In fact, I didn't see a pound of meat the first 2 years I was there, I'd say. But we had very little meat in the diet. But surprisingly enough, we not only kept our mental exercises, we did a lot of physical exercise too. You were confined in a cell, in a room, but I was doing 400 push-ups every morning. Once I got up around and started walking, it took me about 2 years to get back around where I could move. And we were well-versed, well-trained on first aid. But we didn't know what the second stage is, all the training we've had is what you do initially and then you go to a doctor. Well, we didn't have the doctors, what you do initially, and then the other bit we had to just trial and error. And for prolonged medical problems, it's like my right knee was frozen. And one of the guys, fortunately, had a football injury. He sent a message to me through the wall and says, "You got to break that thing loose." And so my roommates would start bending that thing, the physical therapy on it, and they almost killed me, but we were able to break that knee loose, and I got out without having a frozen knee out of it. So as a matter of fact, the knee is just about normal. I ended up with a frozen elbow on the left arm, which it doesn't work. We tried to break that one loose too, but it was busted up too bad, and there's so much cartilage in there. But we tried, and it unfortunately remained frozen.
Due to what? The malnutrition or?
Well, no, it was broken initially on the injection, and as I told you, I was interviewed by an American correspondent, and so to give the American correspondent the answers that they wanted to receive, they broke it again for me in a session then to ensure that he got his story. And so he came in, when he interviewed me, he didn't even know what questions he was going to ask me. And they gave him a script, and they had already rehearsed me for a week on the answers that I was going to give them. So I have a little bit of heartburn on the press at times. Sometimes they go making the news versus reporting the news. And in that case, this guy, Felix Green, he was commissioned with the San Francisco Chronicle. And Felix calls me to suffer quite a bit. And as my roommate Leo Thorson is the same thing. Leo took several beatings just to...
so that they would give an appropriate story to the American correspondents?
Mm-hmm. To get him conditioned and to get him, you didn't want to talk to anybody because of code of conduct, but you took quite a bit of abuse.
Oh, sure.
To get you to go ahead. So almost every one of these, in fact, practically all of the interviews, as you see, that side with the Vietnamese were extracted by force, coercion on the parts of the POWs. So, and they did the same thing to the Iranian hostages. The press got in there and talked to these guys, and the guys had to talk to them because, man, these guys are all over you. So it's bad news to get a guy in that condition because he has no control over what he's going to say.
Well, some people feel the press should not have given the Iranian government all that publicity back then.
Yeah. So, yeah, the press is good, but they have a certain responsibility to uphold. And so sometimes they exceed their bounds, and in our case, they cost us quite a bit of grief.
Yes.
Very much.
Jim, the enemy gave you sandals to wear?
Yeah, the tire sandals, or what we call the Ho Chi Minh sandals, made out of truck tires, and the straps made out of inner tubes.
Oh, really?
These here are the truck tires and inner tube straps.
And the enemy gave you toothpaste and a toothbrush?
Toothpaste and toothbrush. I was quite surprised to see, and as you may see, one of the things that you may be surprised, this is Vietnamese toothpaste, but it is written in English, the toothpaste, and manufactured by the soap factory in English.
Oh.
Cigarettes. The Vietnamese did give us cigarettes too. They gave us 3 cigarettes a day. The Dien Bins, which was one of the better brands, and I was given a pack of them when I was released, and that's what's left of the
Maybe we can get a close-up.
The particular cigarettes. But they would give us 3 cigarettes a day, and the guard would come by and light it for you. You were never allowed to have any matches. And sometimes you'd get cigarettes, and the guard would forget to give you the light, and that's worse yet for an avid nicotine fiend, is to have the cigarettes and no light. But we had those. Of course, the socks. I didn't have socks the first winter I was walking, and my feet about froze because it does get cold there. It gets down. A couple of times we had where it appeared that we had reached freezing or a skim of ice on the water. So, surprisingly enough, it does get down into the 40s and below. Absolutely no heat in the buildings whatsoever.
Jim, for any of our viewers who would like to get some more information, can you recommend 1 or 2 books?
It's an outstanding book by Jeremiah Denton, now Senator Denton, When Hell Was in Session. And they made the movie out of the TV movie, and it depicts probably prison life as good as anything. I watched the interrogation, and I didn't watch it the second time. It was too realistic.
On television?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the name of that book was
When Hell Was in Session.
When Hell Was in Session.
Scars and Stripes by Red McDaniels. Good book. There's one by Robbie Reisner. Several of the prisoners have written of their experiences.
Well, Jim, we appreciate very much your coming here all the way to Raleigh to be with us today. Our guest for this segment of our Veterans Roundtable has been Colonel James Hiteshew from in the Goldsboro area of North Carolina, from Pikeville, actually. Is it Pikeville?
Pikeville.
As usual, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to send us, you may send it to our address placed on your screen, P.O. Box 12743, here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our zip code is 27605. Thanks again, Jim, for helping us out with the information, and we'd like to thank our viewers for watching.